One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. This is yet another session in the world that is transforming rapidly around us. Very interesting news across the world, interesting observations from me and James, and certainly interesting topics to address to everybody that is listening to One Step Ahead Radio. This week we have several interesting insights from different parts of the world. Maybe we can start with the one that is coming out of Europe this time, and that is the fact that France and Emmanuel Macron is arranging or has arranged a big impact summit about artificial intelligence in Paris. And Emmanuel Macron's tech envoy warns attenders current trajectory of artificial intelligence is apparently unsustainable. The impact of artificial intelligence on the environment, inequality have been featured in many ways, but in the opening exchange of this global summit in Paris, attended by political leaders, tech executives and experts, the envoy Anne Bouvard opened a two-day gathering at the Grand Palais in the heart of French capital with a speech referring to the environmental impact of artificial intelligence, which requires vast amount of energy and resources to develop and operate. What she said is that we know that AI can help mitigate climate change, but we also know that its current trajectory is unsustainable. The General Secretary of the Global Union, Christy Hoffman, warned that without working involvement in the use of artificial intelligence, the technology risk increasing inequality. The Uni represents about 20 million workers worldwide in industries including retail, finance and entertainment. On Sunday, last Sunday, Macron promoted the event by posting a montage of deepfake images of himself on Instagram, including a video of him dancing in a disco with various 80s hairstyles in a tongue-in-cheek reference to the technology capabilities. This is very interesting. It's interesting for everybody out there because artificial intelligence has become the topic of any and many conversations that people are having, not only in their daily lives, but also in their businesses and also in the way how they view or try to understand what the implications and impact of artificial intelligence will be going forward. Now, artificial intelligence on one hand, and then we have the another sort of angle, which is related to risk of 1.5 degrees of global warming is already here, sooner than expected, studies have found. Without stringent emission cuts, the world is most probably already with a period defined in the Paris Accord. There is a lot of interesting information in this paper, which researchers in Germany and Austria found that without stringent cuts in emissions, the world was most probably now within the 2 decades where a breach of the Paris Agreement would occur. It is interesting because we have on one hand artificial intelligence, interest and growth, using of that intelligence. Many will call it alien intelligence, not only artificial intelligence, and on the other hand, we have this increasing temperatures as a consequence of climate change, and also the consequences related to that. Now, there are things happening in the U.S. as we know, and there are a lot of things being shooted out of the U.S. One of these things is recently covered by Bloomberg, and it's basically related to a fact that the US may use trade tools to retaliate against European ESG regulations that affect American companies, said Howard Lutnick, the US President Donald Trump picked to become Commerce Secretary. Lutnick was, of course, referring especially to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and he told Republican senators last month that he concerned by the extent to which environmental, social, and governance regulations formulated in Brussels are impacting the US businesses. And for everybody out there listening to this, the CSDDD companies face litigation risk if their value chains are found to contain ESG violations. Like most European Union ESG regulations, CSDDD is designed so that the large firms outside the bloc must comply with the targets European, if they target and when they target European customers. This will cause a lot of trouble for American companies who are withholding or taking away their commitments to ESG and climate, and in particular in relation to their supply chain. Now, with that said, there is also a new thing coming out of the US, which is most likely very interesting, and repercussions will be quite wide, and that is the proposal to stop regulation that regulates the bribes that could be used by American commercial interests outside the US to attain business. James, I've been now reading out some of the stuff that is happening around the world, commenting some of it. Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio.
Hi, Sasha. Good to be here. Good to speak again this week.
Great to have you here. I mean, when we talk about these things, there are so many things happening at the same time. Regulation in the European Union, the counterattacks from the US new elected government and administration. The question is, for companies that you are sort of working with and also talking to, what is happening in their mind in this context? Where are they?
Yeah, I know it's difficult at a certain point. You hear the headlines and how things are changing, but you have to realize that so many companies are already preparing for this stuff and already taking very concrete, real steps in terms of adhering to the European Union directives on reporting and due diligence. So it's creating a lot of uncertainty, a lot of limbo, a lot of I think anger and frustration in a lot of companies, because our first CSRD reports are already landing, right? They're already coming out now. The very first ones were right at the end of January. We started to see them come in February, and obviously between February and March, we're going to see this whole first wave of adoption of the CSRD by European companies, and so they have to take it as a legal obligation. And the difficulty is for all of those who are looking at it further down the line, so non-European companies or else smaller companies in the EU, non-listed companies that may or may not fall within the scope of this legislation. It creates an enormous amount of uncertainty when the whole thing is kind of trying to be pro-business and pro-deregulation, as it were. So there needs to be kind of thinking about enhancing sustainability without overburdening. I think a lot of people within sustainability at the moment within companies are suffering a lot in terms of not being able to give clear guidance internally, and therefore sort of suffering changes in governance, changes in allocations, so companies kind of shifting who's in charge of sustainability, where does it fall within the organization? How much, is it a compliance role? How much does it fall under finance? How much is, does it sit at the top table in terms of, is there a chief sustainability officer on the executive committee? So all those decisions are kind of being taken at the moment, and a lot of companies now, they're kind of in a wait, and they're either already decided and saying, oh mate, have we made the wrong decision? Or because there's kind of legal obligations behind all of this as well. It's not sort of a nice...
And that's one of the takeaways that I think it's so interesting. It's a legal obligation in Europe for European companies, and now the pushback in the US, it's all about European companies targeting American companies targeting European consumers. Do you foresee, do you anticipate that there will be a lot of legal cases going forward when American companies, for certain reasons, do not comply with this regulation?
No, I think before we get to that, we'll certainly see, this is the whole kind of transactional deal culture that we're living in, and so it's obviously going to be subject to negotiations and bargaining with lots of chips. The way it happened now, all the chips are on the table, so you can trade your CSRD with tariffs, with all these things are interchangeable, and I presume that the EU will find some kind of compromise, also because they're facing pressure internally, right? We've had from Germany first and then from France very clear requests to rein in the scope of of these sustainability directives, so it hits fewer companies. And what they tried to say is, let's keep the rigor but apply it to fewer companies, right? Burden is less, and let's make sure that the big players who account for, I mean, we've seen this also with CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism that wants to put a carbon tax on imports of certain goods, and now the EU is saying, well, it's like if we just constrain it to just a few sectors, that covers 80% of emissions imports.
Yes.
Let's just focus on.
Let's be practical. Let's be practical, efficient. Yes.
Yes, very practical. We love being practical. The question is, I mean, I guess from your perspective, is kind of how investors are going to kind of respond to this or not. Whether they'll find the first CSRD reports in Europe will somehow be sort of, it's been so long being asked to say we need better data, we need comparable data, we need more standardization, whether they'll actually get that and find that there's some kind of value add in the data that comes out.
I mean, look, for investors, the level playing field has been developing over the last, I would say, 5 years in the context of sustainability. And now what we are facing is a shifting level playing field for US, and also, I mean, the way how investors should interpret the data coming out of the US, which is not sanctioned and legalized in the same way as in the European Union. What are the sort of implications of that on the investment decisions? There is a lot of talk in the investment world, sustainability investment world, about Tesla in particular, because Tesla is held by many sustainability funds around the world. The question is, does it still qualify? Has it ever been a qualified stock for these kind of investments? There will be, I think, in many cases, much more of what I call localization of investments going forward, where investors will be forced to target more particular outcomes with investments compared to what they've done before. If you do a global investments, I think more future of sustainability investments, at least in my sort of head, will be more regionalized and more localized, where you can actually track the outcome of what you're trying to impact through the money that you channel to certain companies in certain sectors. But what is sort of a complex, I think, going back to what we discussed earlier on what these people, what the sustainability head in the company that is listed in Europe is thinking right now. What do you think in terms of, where do they find motivation? Because everywhere you look around, it doesn't look as it looks quite negative. The outlook is quite negative. I mean, if you look at the facts on the ground, companies like BMW is betting on petrol cars. Airbus is pushing back plans to fly hydrogen plane. Equinor in Europe is increasing the oil extraction by I think 12% next year. It's an enormous amount of emissions that will be emitted due to that. So the question is, if you are heading sustainability department, how do you actually feel today? That's a good one.
Yeah, and I think, from what I hear and what I see, that role of being head of doesn't mean that you sit at the table, doesn't mean necessarily you have leverage on strategic decisions, because you're kind of overwhelmed with so much process and reporting and beam counting, and there's so much, and also because the compliance around sustainability has become very much more rigid. And as I said here, because it's a kind of a legal obligation, there's liability. What is liable, the management board or the board of directors for what goes out being published. So there's more scrutiny. At the same time, a lot more complexity, because, there's the whole thing that they're really pressing for the value chain report. But these people are kind of going crazy trying to find to adapt and above all to do that very, very complicated thing of, so gathering data from suppliers that's verifiable, that's reliable, that they can actually put in their annual report. It's not, just it's subject to assurance and verification. So I think these people are kind of quietly going out their minds, because they're sort of swamped with so much of this, I suppose to some extent necessary work to make sure that there's the right rigor and the detail and everything. But then they raise their heads and they say, well, nobody's actually looking at it. So the challenge, what you said just before, is kind of what's the return on all of this?
Yeah. How do you make money on this? How do you make it commercially viable? That's the interesting part. Yeah, at least for me as investor.
These people with the time that they have available and the leverage that they might have inside, it's like turning to the commercial value of sustainability or the investment value of it, that they can actually make that argument, not internally, not justify to the board, but to be able to actually say this will make a difference to our customer, so make a difference to our clients. We'll be preferred. There's actually some kind of premium in the market for us because we've got better. We have more preference. We somehow are going to shift sales and that commercial leverage. I think that's going to be the key way that people can really regain the ground in terms of sustainability.
I mean, look, in my book, I think the next frontier of sustainability on the corporate side and corporate level is most likely the commercialization, or, how do you make actually value out of all the work that you do. And in my experience, and I don't know if you share that view, is that many sustainability professionals working for corporates around the world still have big difficulties to actually explain that, partly because in many cases they are not even part of that sort of a fabric that makes these kind of decisions. But hopefully, with the regulation that is in place in Europe, we will be able to move to this frontier of commercial sustainability, or value propositions where companies will be able to explain to shareholders and stakeholders, this is exactly, or at least this is the range of the value that we create with that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, it must be difficult, but you have to sort of think of these people as going through Death Valley at the moment, and they're burning in the heat, but they know that on the other side they're going to get out. And I think, the smart people are going to need to think about building alliances internally, building alliances with innovation, with sales, with product development, with the business side of the organization, and kind of get out of their sort of corporate office. Because that's, once we've got these kind of the reporting in shape and, and that process kind of transformed into the CSRD world, it's going to be like, okay, how do I actually justify and make the cases we were saying? So I think people have to have that kind of look beyond the troubles of this moment and start to plan and lay their alliances for how they're going to be able to win that argument.
As a long term and the long sort of a time horizon makes a difference as well, because of course we are in a downturn right now. There's a lot of heat coming towards the sustainability professionals in many companies, and also on the investment side. But that heat is not going to stay here forever, and we know that the planet and also the requirements of doing business today and going forward will be much more related to resilience of the businesses to tackle not only the consequences of climate change, but also to tap into consumer trends and new growing consumer and customer markets around the world. With that, that will be all for this week on One Step Ahead Radio. Please join us, listen to us, share this, and we welcome you to join us again in 1 week's time. James, many thanks for today, and have a nice weekend.
Thanks to you, Sasha. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.